Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with author and one of America's leading behavioral management and business marketing specialists, James I. Bond. As the author of the multi-award-winning book, Brain Glue, How to Sell Easier by Making Your Ideas Sticky, he is full of brilliant tales. For 13 years, he ran one of Southern California's leading behavioral management firms, working with a who's who of American business. Early in his career, he ran an advertising agency in Montreal, working with a wide range of Fortune 500 and smaller firms. These days, he resides in Thousand Oaks, California. Enjoy this interview.
Joe, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful. How are you today?
I'm alive. I'm doing great.
Well, that's good. That's half the battle, isn't it?
Are you in Kansas City?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'm originally from Montreal, but I live in Southern California now for some strange reason.
Man, it doesn't sound strange to me. Southern California is beautiful, and I hear Montreal is just probably one of the most beautiful places on the planet.
Yeah, I always torture friends that live back in Montreal and say, oh, it's so cold. It's like 70 degrees here. It's really terrible. And they say, shut up.
Well, I guess the one good thing about being in Kansas City lately is that it's always fun to be in a Super Bowl town. And there are a lot of things going on. We're going to get the World Cup here in 2024, and it's a great city. People that come through, they always like it. Have you been here?
I know, I've never been there.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely, I have to put it on my list.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you got to get play a barbecue, catch some jazz, maybe catch a game. There's always something that's going on. So, but man, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. And what I want to do before we get into Brain Glue and your world, I want to know the last 3 years living through a pandemic. How did you survive it? How has it changed the way that you live your life and conduct business now?
Well, I love Zoom. I mean, I think a lot of people don't, and I've had people complaining about Zoom and all that stuff, but I mean, there's nothing beats being face-to-face with a person, but, yeah, just even family. I mean, I've got an iPhone, and so we're on, what do you call it, the video part of it, so we're talking to our kids. We've got a son and 3 daughters who are old. My son's 41. How did that happen? I'm really old. But yeah, so it just, I think it's that connection that it's really great, is the fact that we have, Zoom came along just at the right time. Certainly we should have invested in Zoom, but anyway. But yeah, I think, but I think also it's torture that there's something fantastic about being live with people, and COVID it just caused all kinds of issues and all kinds of political issues. I mean, just talk about battles between what do you believe, what do you not believe, and everything else. We've got, half our family is, one side, half is the other side, and it's like, come on, guys, let's get over this. We're still family,
Yeah, it did certainly put a proverbial line in the sand for a lot of people, I think. And so let me ask you this. Let's get a better handle on exactly what you do for a living. I'm going to hypothetically put you in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day, and one of the kids looks up and asks you what you do for a living. How do you answer that child?
I help people. So, okay, kids, you have an idea that you think is really awesome? I'm going to show you how to make people excited about it, passionate about it. And a big part of it is you get passionate about it too. I mean, this is one thing I learned about selling, is like, if you're passionate, I had this guy, Zig Ziglar, who told me that, the secret to persuasion, the secret to selling is being passionate about something and just sharing that passion with somebody else. Now, the good news is I actually found some tricks that will make people even more passionate about the stuff you want. You want to hear about it?
Awesome. So let's get to the essence of how you became who you are. Let's go back to your childhood and how these seeds and foundational pieces of you got instilled for you to be who you are today. How did all that happen, and how did because you're obviously in a profession where you're giving a lot to people, you're motivating people, you're helping them. How did all this happen? How did it sprout into you?
So I was really good at math. I sort of had a tortured childhood with my mom, and and she threw illogic at me, and I had to sort of live with that. And so I was really great in math because, hey, I'm right. I just won. I answered the question. And so I love math, but nobody noticed I also loved English. And so in college, everybody pushed me, guidance counselors and everything else, to go into mechanical engineering. So, okay, I went into that. But electives, and this is why in college electives are so important. But even if you don't go to college, trying stuff that you haven't done before is really valuable. And I got art classes, and it was really cool because people said, I was going to get like naked models. Wow, isn't that awesome? But as I got into it, I realized this is triggering a different part of the brain that I'm used to. I focus on the logic side, and this is like emotional, engagement and passion. And I went like, wow, look at the shape of her face, look at the shape of her body, and this is, and people say, wow, it must be fun. You had got nude models, naked models, and I wasn't thinking of it that way. Not because I wasn't. Yeah, it was cool, but it wasn't that. It was, really just fascinating. The other part of this other part of the brain that needed to be fed, and I never fed it, and so. I apprenticed for some world famous photographers. I learned photography, and I apprenticed with two world famous photographers. I remember this guy, Sam Haskins. He's a British guy who was like world famous. He was the first guy. He did a poster book called Haskins Posters, and one of his photos he made over $1 million with. And I'm like, you can make over $1 million from one photograph? Like, wow, this is a cool profession. But so I remember he was setting up a photograph for Seagram's, the booze company, and so he has to do a photograph of the bottle, and then he's going to do a photograph of people. And so I said, okay, I'll go get your camera. He turned to me and he said, why? And I said, because you're gonna take a photograph. And he said, I'm not inspired yet. I need to get inspired first, and then I'll get the camera out and try to capture it. And it just, for me, it was profound because it was like, whoa, I at one point when I became a photographer, I worked, I shared a studio with this artist, and he would pull out a piece of paper and get inspired while he was drawing. And he's a fabulous artist. But I realized that people like Norman Rockwell and all that stuff, they would not touch the canvas until they got inspired. Norman Rockwell would go to, a playground and watch kids play, and then suddenly go, oh, I get this idea. He gets a trigger of an idea and a passion and emotion, and then he tried to translate that into painting. And I realized that this is like so profound. So I eventually had an advertising agency in Montreal. I'm in Southern California now, but Montreal was fun. And, we eventually won like major accounts, some of the world's biggest companies. And so I had an opportunity to win the anti-drug campaign in America. And so I came up with logical reasons why. We had a really good campaign, and then we lost. And when I saw what we lost to, I became terrified. And it was a guy holding an egg saying, this is your brain. And then he just breaks the shell and it drops the egg into a sizzling frying pan. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions? And I knew it was a gazillion times more powerful than anything that we did, but it terrified me because I didn't know how did they do this? How did they tap the emotion side of the brain? And so what I did was I basically created something called a passion box. And I said, I have no idea how to do this. First, I was terrified. It was like, did I pick the wrong profession? How can I not know how to emotionally sell people, I can do it passionately by talking about something I'm passionate about, but how do I emotionally trigger, passion in other people? And so because This Is Your Brain on Drugs was so profound and how it triggered emotion, I wrote This Is Your Brain on Drugs on a 3x5 card, and I put it into my passion box. And over the years, actually over 35 years I've been doing it, so I'm really old, guys. But I would, every time I see something or hear something, my wife hated me going with me to like a doctor's office because I'd go through the magazines and I go, this is fabulous. I start tearing it out of the magazine to bring it home. But one day I had John Gray was telling me, this author, he was telling me he wrote this fantastic book called Men, Women, and Relationships. Really fabulous. And he sold a few thousand copies and he was frustrated. And he's sitting there, he's in a seminar talking about trying to promote his book, and he said something, and all the women in the audience laughed. I mean, like, laughed hysterically, and the men kind of looked at the women and went like, what are they laughing at? What was so funny about what he just said? And then one of the women said, it's almost like men are from a different planet. And so John Gray said, yeah, I guess men are from Mars. And the whole audience started laughing like crazy. When he got home, he thought, well, if men are from Mars, where are women from? I guess women are from Venus. Venus is the god of love. And then he got this crazy idea. What happens if I change the title of my book to Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? And then just, do tweaks throughout the book so that I refer to Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. So basically just change the title of the book. And he was telling me this. He went from 20,000 copies. When he changed the title of his book, he sold 50 million books. 50 million books just because of the different title, because the title triggered the part of the brain. And it was like, to me, it was like, wow, this is amazing. When I got home, I went into my passion box, I set up my bed, and if it wasn't made, I made my bed so it was flat. And I started pulling out all the everything that I had in my passion box, and I said, can I group these things? And I realized, well, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus is a metaphor, it's an analogy. Men aren't really from, we might be actually from a different planet, us guys, but are men really from a different planet? And then I realized that this is your brain on drugs as a metaphor. It isn't really, your brain isn't an egg, but they were using, somebody probably came up with the idea of, like when you're using drugs, when you get on drugs, what happens? I guess your brain gets fried. Oh, okay. What else gets fried? Well, eggs get fried. And they came up with the idea as a metaphor, and I realized like, wow. And I started putting, Shark Tank, the TV show Shark Tank. It's not a tank full of sharks, it's a metaphor. It feels like you're in a tank full of sharks if you're on a show probably, but it's a metaphor. And I started realizing, whoa, metaphor, that's one of the things. I suddenly was able to catalog a bunch of these things. And then I was reading about, what's it called? Rocky Road ice cream. When you get Rocky Road ice cream, it isn't like you open it up and there are rocks inside it. It's a metaphor. And I was like, wow, Rocky Road is a metaphor. And as I started researching it, I discovered that it was, it turned Dreyer's ice cream into from a struggling company into a massive success because they were the first company that actually mixed things up and it came up with a metaphor for how they described their product. Now, Rocky Road also uses alliteration. That's another thing I realized. Rocky Road, it's a repeating sound. And suddenly I realized, like, whoa, look at all the other blockbuster companies and products that use alliteration. Coca-Cola, Best Buy, PayPal, TikTok. TikTok's competing with Facebook. And, they've passed Facebook in the number of users they have. Do you think it's an accident that these guys used alliteration? It's just really, and the more research I did, the more I recognized there are actual patterns. And you could take these, you're probably old enough to remember O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was in a murder trial for the murder of his wife, okay? And his lawyer, Johnny Cochran, came up with this phrase, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Poetry and street talk, but poetry. If the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Now, most lawyers would say, if the glove doesn't fit, you need to let my client go, okay? But he recognized the power of, he didn't call it brain glue back then, but brain glue. He recognized the power of, of poetry. And if you can turn it into a rhyme, it's going to stick with the jurors. And, of course, O.J. pretended that the glove didn't fit him. But I remember two jurors that were asked after, why did you let him go with so much evidence against him? And then both of them said, well, if the glove don't fit, we knew if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. The glove didn't fit, so we had to acquit. It's so powerful when you sort of tap into this that you can actually get somebody freed from an almost certain guilty verdict. That's how powerful it is. So, yeah, sorry I'm blabbing away, but once I started recognizing brain glue and where it is, I start seeing it in all these different places that most people, don't see it.
And that's interesting because you give a good backstory to the book. And, I'm curious throughout your life and your business career, who's been a role model or a hero, someone that's motivated you consistently?
Well, Zig Ziglar changed my life. I know he's dead now, but Zig Ziglar, a motivational speaker, changed my life. When I started, I was in advertising and I had to sell, and I got in business with my brother, and he was a really good salesman. So we changed things. We raised our price and all this stuff, and he wasn't afraid to sell. But family and business doesn't always work. I love my brother dearly, my brother John, but one of my brothers. But I suddenly had to sell, and so I started having to take sales classes because I needed to pay for my studio that we had, And I hated selling. And then I went with my wife to she wasn't my wife back then, my girlfriend, to a Zig Ziglar seminar, and it changed my life. He said things like, "Kids are the greatest salesmen." He said, "You're in a store and your kid says, hey Dad, can I have this ball? No, please no. Can I hold it? Yeah, okay, fine, hold it." And then there you are at the conveyor belt, and suddenly this ball is rolling down the conveyor belt, and you go like, "Okay, fine, how much is the ball?" And he said, we know deep down, if we're passionate about something, like if you see a movie that you're passionate about, nobody has to teach you how to sell. You know how to sell. So what you really need to do is, selling is communication of passion. And so if you could be passionate, that can change, that can really help you. And then it changed everything for me, because it helped me understand, selling is just like if you have an idea and you're trying to sell it, explain it to somebody, that's selling. People don't like the word selling, but it's basically, if you have a piece of art and it's really fantastic, I'll look at a piece of art. I went to school in college. We had this guy, Mark Prent, and Mark Prent ended up becoming world famous as an artist, as a sculptor. He did stuff like, he did a sculpture of a piece of road and a deer on the road and tires over the deer, as if the deer got run over by a car. I mean, he did really crazy stuff, but he became world famous. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was thinking of Mark Prent. He just died, and it was really sad. What was I saying?
You were just talking about Zig and how he motivated you.
Oh yeah. But so Zig Ziglar, so I was torn because I have a creative background. I always consider myself to have an edge over other people, creativity. But with but I also knew I had to sell. And when you own your own business, or you got to sell. And I was like, I was tortured. But he helped me understand that there's a creative side of selling, that if you can tap into the creative side, don't be like a car salesman, be like a doctor. I came up with these 5 questions, what do you sell, to who, how's it used, what are you competing with, why yours? And I realized that when I go on a presentation, I'd be on the spot, because I had to show them stuff that hopefully they liked. But if I could ask them the questions first, which I never thought I could, I didn't know somehow I was allowed to, but I am, I would say, I would like to show you some of the things I have. And the client would say, okay, and I'd lean forward, and they would lean forward. And before I pulled out my portfolio, I'd say, but I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's okay, first. And they would say, okay, sure. And I'd lean back, and they'd lean back in their chair. And then I would ask them the questions, and they would tell me what they wanted. And it was like, wow, I suddenly went from being a car salesman to being like a doctor. Tell me what's going on and your problems. And, oh, yeah, if I could fix that, would you give me the project? And it just became really powerful. But, yeah, Zig Ziglar was profound for me, because he made me more comfortable being able to sell. As time went on, I became much better because I started learning tricks and techniques and stuff like the power of questions. In fact, what's the most powerful tool of human interaction that exists? I'm using it now, aren't I? Can you tell what I'm doing? I'm asking questions. And what I learned from that is there's something called redintegration, which is the brain's need for completion. It's why we watch crappy movies to the end. When my wife was sitting watching a TV show, I said, "Is it good?" She said, "No, it's terrible." I said, "Well, why are you watching it?" "Well, I got to see how it turns out." And questions are like that too, because it triggers this thing inside the brain. And so when I learned that the brain actually gets triggered by certain things like questions, I'm like, whoa. And that became, it fascinated me, this whole psychological aspect of can you trigger different parts of the brain? But anyway, sorry, I'm blabbing away. But to me, Zig Ziglar was the most important, because he literally made me comfortable in doing something that I hated doing.
So, in kind of conjunction with Zig, if you could meet anybody alive right now on the planet, who would it be? Who would you love to talk to?
Oh, there are a lot of people. Muhammad Ali, for one. Zig Ziglar again. Albert Einstein. That would be interesting. he was a rebel. A lot of people don't realize how much of a rebel he was. He has great sayings. You know,
Yeah.
when everybody goes left, go right. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
But no,
that's a good
Malcolm
look.
X. Malcolm X had really good lines. Malcolm X used a tool that I discovered called chiasmus, which is like the opposite of rhyme. It's like you know, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Okay. Well, he said, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock landed on us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it flips. He said, when you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. You know, and these are powerful. Once I discovered but anyway, so Malcolm X would be one, definitely. I'd love to be marching. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Martin Luther King Jr., 62, so I was about 10 years old. And then just when he got assassinated. But I was like, I grew up in that era of, you know, civil rights and just trying to make the world better. In fact, I'm a baby boomer, and I remember this is one of the things somebody said, and I agree with it, is like we were one of the first generations to focus on trying to leave the world better than we found it. You know, and then growing up with Martin Luther King and then JFK, John F. Kennedy and stuff, who used chiasmus too. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. It's a flip. And, you know, when you learn the technique, you can suddenly start applying it to things. He said, mankind must put an end to war, or war will put an end to mankind, you know?
Yeah.
And that's also artists. Sure. I love Steely Dan. They were, like, fantastic. In fact, our middle daughter, Lauren, her name is Lauren Asia, A-J-A. And so last year she was asking, why did you name me Asia? It's such a cool name. And I said, well, because of Steely Dan. We love the album Asia, and the song was fantastic. So she listened to the song and she said, they're horrible. I said, sorry. You know, so we name your child something they don't like. But she's gotten into it now. But
cool.
Do you like Steely Dan?
Oh, I love them. Yeah. They're wonderful.
Yeah.
Now,
so many artists wanted to play with them. Yeah, so many artists wanted to play with them. I'm amazed how many famous artists, and they didn't even want to put their name on it. They just wanted to play with those guys.
Yeah, a lot of what I do is jazz radio, and I was just talking to a veteran guitarist, Dave Stryker, and he had a trio that just went on tour with Steely Dan this summer. So they were talking about it, and they have a lot of jazz roots. Those guys, they're just really talented.
Right.
So, in your life of accomplishment and things that you've done, what are you the proudest of?
Okay. I'm proud of my book, but I'm proud of my book not just because people loved it. I mean, I got people like Jack Canfield, who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul, that sold like 500 million books, and he said, like, this is so important. I got to share it with everybody in my company is getting a copy of this and everything. So that was kind of cool. But it was my kids. You know, my kids were proud of me. You know, I mean, I was talking about it as I was doing and developing the book. And there's something really powerful. You know, one of my partners, an ex-partner, he got a stroke, so he lost the ability to talk, to walk, to drive a car. I mean, it was really, to type on a computer, he couldn't coordinate his fingers. He's better now. But he has no kids. He has no siblings, he and his wife. And they have no parents. It's just the two of them in the world. You know, and I realized that, you know, it's just really awesome having kids. And, you know, I'm proud that, you know, they're proud. I actually wrote a book before this one called The Secret Life of Fathers. I started something called the Father-Daughter Project to try to improve the relationship I have with my daughters by interviewing other dads of daughters. And my kids were proud of me of that. So I think it's, you know, I've been a tough father in the early years as I was struggling trying to make a living and stuff. And so the fact that I'm connected with my kids now makes me really proud.
So if you had a dream,
making a difference with people, you know, I get people leaving testimonials and talking about, and I'm not trying to sell my book. I'm trying to be honest on this. But like people are saying like, wow, I do volunteer work for the Small Business Administration, and people come up to me like I'm standing in a grocery store with my wife, and this woman who's like 80 years old comes up and says, your husband was so amazing. We have a button company and a button store, and he helped us, and we're doing really well now. It's like, you know, it's embarrassing, you know, getting pulled aside in a grocery store. But it just, you know, it sort of makes me feel like my life has purpose. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off on that.
Yeah, no, you're good. So I'm curious, if you have a dream tonight, you ran into a younger version of yourself, say in your 20s, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've lived, the wisdom you've gained, what would you tell that young version?
I don't think I'd tell him anything, and I'll tell you why. I got screwed in business at one point. I helped this guy, and he became massively successful and then screwed me out of all my money and everything. But you got to go through the pain, and you got to go through. I mean, look at Oprah Winfrey, okay? I mean, she was molested as a child. You know, if you take that away from her, you take away her whole life. You know, she can have empathy for all these people now because she knows what pain is like. She knows what torture is like. And so, you know, when we first moved to California, because I had an advertising background, I couldn't get a job. I tried to get a job at one point, even at McDonald's, and I couldn't get a job. And I remember laying in bed crying with my wife next to me. I didn't want her to wake up, but I didn't know how to make a living. You know, I mean, because I got rid of my studio and my clients and everything else. And I moved to California, Southern California, which is like a totally different planet in many ways. And, you know, and part of me would say, well, I wish I would tell that person it'll be okay. But I didn't want to, because sometimes you got to go through the painful part of the torture part of the struggling part of what you do in order to be who you are. I think that, you know, I wouldn't appreciate it as much right now if I hadn't gone through that. You know, I look back and I say, man, I was practically homeless, me and my kids and my wife. And I can look at now and say, like, wow, I mean, you know, this is really fantastic. I also believe that God's involved somehow, because I couldn't do all this myself. But, you know, but the point is, no, I don't think I would give myself any advice. I'd observe to see how I'm going through it. But no, I mean, it's easy for me to say now because I'm past the pain.
So everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, clients, colleagues, but ultimately you live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are? A creative person who's trying to turn other people on to creativity.
I think that's more than anything else. It's my whole life has been, I started as a very logical person, and I learned passion. And I think what's happening today and after COVID and everything else, people are depressed out there, and they don't realize that, you know, get yourself excited. You know, they had, I forget what his name was, but this guy who was dying, who was on his deathbed in New York at one of the major magazines, and then he had read about humor and laughing. And so what he did was he started just, you know, he was told he has like 3 months to live. So what he did was he started watching cartoons. He started reading funny books. He forced himself just to be constantly around humor. And he ended up living for like 15 or 20 years after that. And it's just, you know, it's this whole idea of we need to turn everybody back onto humor. You know, you look at Chris Rock and Jerry Seinfeld said we can't even go to colleges anymore because somebody's offended. That's hurting us as a race. And I think more than anything else, we need to be advocates for bringing humor back, bringing fun back. You know, I saw this guy who had this T-shirt. It said "Life sucks and then you die," and I'm like, no. You know, this is not a practice life, guys. Everybody who's on the call, and you, Joe and me, I mean, this is not a practice. This is life, you know, and we have an opportunity to live it right now. We can laugh, you know, and you're not going to laugh at anything. You might get, you know, pissed off at something, but, you know, give yourself a couple of minutes, get over it, and then start laughing again. You know, watch a comedian or read a book or come up with jokes yourself. I think when you do that, you start recognizing first we live longer, and you know, and it makes a difference in people's lives. If life is not fun, why are you living it? You know, you can actually change it as hard as it is. And I know sometimes I get depressed. You know, sometimes I get depressed, and I have to force myself to. You know, sometimes you have to sort of go through it a little bit, but get past it and say, you know, it's a physiological thing. Maybe something I ate is making me depressed. Changing the chemistry in my body or something. And just kind of force yourself to enjoy life. Do not get the T-shirt "Life sucks and then you die." How do you feel about
that?
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm a big fan of comedy, and I find it just absolutely irreprehensible that we have made comedians punching bags, and we're just too sensitive. We have hit a point in reality where the Orwellian novel is something that we're living through right now, where we are genuinely almost living in personality points. Like, everybody's got, and there's this proclivity for the American mindset to really enjoy cancel culture and really enjoy bringing people down. People get misquoted all the time. It's that John Lennon quote when he got misquoted, that he said that they were more popular than Jesus, and he never said that. It got misconstrued. Right. He was saying that more kids were listening to his albums than reading the Bible. That was a gross misrepresentation. It happens all the time. And unfortunately, comedians are getting to that point now where they are under a microscope that they never used to be. They used to be heralded as the people that would make you relax at the end of the day. But I think Americans have lost a way of understanding how relaxation is supposed to work, and everybody's so sensitive. You know, it's really unfortunate. But I think that, like anything else, history is a carousel. We go around and around, and we're going to get back to a time where it's going to be okay again. But I think right now, I really feel for the comedic world, because they are genuinely just nervous about the interpretation of what everybody's going to say. And you know what? The truth hurts. And Carlin and all those guys, Kinnison, all of those guys were a part of that troop of people that genuinely put the mirror up, and people don't like it. But you know what? It's just the way it is. And if you don't like it, leave the room. You don't have to take pot shots and misrepresent these guys. Just don't get involved. Leave. But yeah, I think we have definitely, we've entered a very thin-skinned portion of our world. And it's ironic because we just went through something that none of us have lived through, which is a global pandemic, which should have really strengthened us and given us a better girth. But it just really, not for a lot of people it hasn't. For a lot of other people it has. But yeah. And
I grew up with George Carlin. George Carlin changed the world. I mean, he changed the world. Besides the fact that he had, 12 words you're not supposed to say or whatever, but he changed the world because he got us thinking. You know, and this is one of the things. I'm old enough to have gone through many recessions and stuff. The greatest creativity comes out of a recession, because it forces the creativity in us, because you can't survive otherwise unless you come up with a new way of doing music, a new type of art, a new, way of communicating, a new way of doing podcasts. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the Bob Dylan moment's right here. I mean, if there was ever a time that anybody wanted to create and be in that moment, right now is it, even during the pandemic. Yeah, and if you can't find inspiration through these times, you probably have the wrong profession.
That's right. Exactly.
So, James, this has been great. Before we get out of the proverbial digital door here, I want to make sure that if anybody wants to get brain glue, anybody wants to learn more about you, anything revolving around your world, where's the best place to go?
So two things. First is braingluebook.com would be an easy way to do this. And you could just check out the book on Amazon. It's really, I think you guys are going to people are just loving it. And I'm really proud of it. Also, just, there are tools, like I was thinking of it for your show. And, it's crunching on creative crackers. The show is like crunching on creative crackers. Like in this other one, rocket fuel for the creative mind. That's what this show is. But this is, Brain Glue gives you opportunities to come up with stuff where you go like, oh, I could describe this even more fun, in a more fun way, and it just sticks to the brain. So yeah, Brain Glue book is an easy way to find it.
James, this has been wonderful, man. You're a great cat. Thank you for opening up. Thanks for your story. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
And you rock. Take care. You too, man.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.